Okay, so welcome everybody to today's session. We are going to be continuing on building our semantic model. This time around, we're going to see how to add measures to our semantic model. And what we are going to be talking about specifically today is something called DAX. And DAX is short for data analysis expressions. That's what we will be talking about today. Data analysis expressions. Now, so the question now is, what is DAX? Well, DAX is a language, and it is a language used specifically in Power BI. It used to be used in a previous tool. I think then it used to be, I think, in analysis services. But of course, it's now mainly used in Power BI. So it was used in analysis services. It can also be used in Excel to manipulate and analyze data. And it allows us to create custom calculations. And we'll be using these calculations within our reports and within our visuals as well. So, what are the main things we need to know about DAX as we go on? The first thing we want to know is that DAX is a collection of libraries and functions. I'm going to explain. Now, it gives us lots of built in functions. Some of those functions are for aggregation. So, we have here aggregation functions. Now, those aggregation functions will include functions like sum, and for example, some functions like average. So yeah, so that includes aggregation functions. Now that also includes logical functions. Now those logical functions will include functions like if and switch functions. We'll explain some of them, so don't worry too much if you don't understand what we are talking about. And the one that we can relate better with will be function that we use in calculating time. Those functions are called time intelligence functions. So we will have functions around time, of course. So we're going to have things like dates and all of that. Just a minute, please. I don't see anybody else here. So yeah, so these are the three kinds of functions, the three categories of functions that we've got, but there are others. Now, apart from having being a collection of libraries and functions, we can use DAX to create expressions and to create formula. So similar to the kinds of formulas we have in Excel, but of course, it's more suitable for relational data models. It allows us to create expressions using the functions, some of the functions we've mentioned, and this allows us to gain some additional information from our semantic model. Okay, we could also use DAX to create things called calculated tables, calculated columns, and measures. We're going to be talking a lot more about that. So, for example, we can define calculations that we want to use in aggregations. For example, we can define calculated columns, which are fields that we can add to our tables. And then we can create entirely new tables using DAX. We are going to see how to do that. So what this means is that that allows us to enhance our modeling and reporting capabilities. So DAX is really very important when it comes to handling our data in Power BI because it makes it possible for us to create custom reports and to be able to have a deeper understanding as to some of the things that we can gain, some of the information we can gain within uh, our reports. So let's see some more things about that. So let's go ahead and look at how, for example, we can create a calculated measure. So let's go ahead and quickly see what measures are in DAX. Okay, we mentioned measures before. So let's go ahead and see what measures are. So what is a measure? Now in Power BI, and of course other Microsoft data tools like Excel, allowing us to define some dynamic calculations. We could use measures. Now, measures usually are computed at runtime. They will happen at runtime. Now, what that means is this. It means that the details that the measure is going to be calculating is not stored within our data model, or it's not stored within our semantic model. So measures are created through the use of DAX. So we are going to be creating measures using DAX. And what the measure will involve would mean using some of the expressions and functions that we talked about in the previous slide, like the sum, the average, and some more complex values. Now, so what that means is measures are computed on the fly. Now, what that means is this. When a user is interacting with a report, for example, let me just let someone in. When a user is interacting with a report, for example, the measure will be recalculated instantly. And that measure is going to be based on filters, on slicers, and different kinds of visual elements, which is going to be ensuring that our results are dynamic. Now, another thing being calculated in the fly means is that it is not stored in our semantic model. So let me just, it's not stored. So it is not stored in the semantic model, of course. So what that means is it exists virtually. Okay, I'll just add another person. So it exists virtually within the model, and the implication of it existing virtually means that um, it will minimize the storage usage, and of course it will maximize responsiveness and flexibility. Now again, uh, measures of course would respond to the different kinds of interactions, so they are going to adapt to context. What that means is that our measures will change dynamically based on the sections, such as the different time periods, the categories, and the filters. And we will go when we get into the lab environment, we are going to see that it's got a special icon. So there is a specific icon that will make us know that a specific column or a specific value is based on a measure. So those are some of the things that we need to take note of about measures. Now, there are differences, there are different kinds of measures that we are going to also be talking about. We are going to be looking at different kinds of measures. Measures could be implicit, they could be explicit, and all of those kinds of things. So let's go ahead and see the different types of measures that we can have. So we can have implicit measures. So measures can be implicit, they could be explicit, and they could be quick. So these are different kinds of measures. Don't worry about the grammar. I'm going to do my best to explain what each of these things mean. So starting with implicit measures. So I just call measures here. So what do implicit measures mean? Now, implicit measures means that they are generated automatically by Power BI. For example, if we do things like drag a numerical column into a visual that requires aggregation. Of course, an example of a visual that requires aggregation is a table or a chart. So what that means is it is created automatically because we don't need to write any formula using DAX. Power BI will determine the calculation based on the context. Of course, we've got different options for modifying these measures, which are restricted to basic aggregations that we talked about, like sum. Of course, you know what sum does. It sums, like average, like count, and minimum and maximum and all of that. Now, since they are implicit and they are calculated automatically, the implication is that, well, the level of customization that we can have with implicit measures is relatively limited. Okay, so those are some of the things that we can take note of. That takes us to the other kind of measure, which is the explicit measure. Now, explicit measures are custom defined calculations and they are created by the user. So that means you've got to go ahead and create these kinds of measures. They are not, of course, calculated by the model, but through a drag and drop. You have to go ahead and create these measures. Now, since you are the one creating it, as you can imagine, there is more flexibility for this. So it is more flexible for calculation. So there is more flexibility. So it's more flexible compared to the implicit measure. So it's much more flexibility. Now, another thing you want to take note of about this is that explicit measures are stored within the data model itself. So it's available within your semantic model, meaning that you can reuse these explicit measures in other kinds of reports. Of course, we are going to be looking at a good deal of some of these things shortly when we get into the lab. And that takes us to the one that is perhaps the easiest one to create, which is the quick measures. Now, quick measures basically are calculations that are pre-built and are available in Power BI. Okay, they allow us to create measures without having to write DAX manually. Okay, so of course it has a wizard-like interface. You can select a calculation type. Maybe you want to find out things like the total, the average, and then Power BI is going to go ahead and automatically generate the corresponding formula for you. So those are the kinds of measures we have. And we could also create a calculated column as well. What that means is we could go ahead and create a column using DAX, just using DAX only. We can use DAX to create a column. Okay, so a calculated column here is a data field, and we create this data field using DAX. Of course, we could have, for example, we could have quantity, we could have profit, or we could have a cost price and selling price, for example, as various columns, and then we can use DAX to calculate a column called profit, for example. So those are calculated columns. So we by doing such a thing, we have the ability, for example, to generate information that we need from information that we already have, for example. So we can do that. But you have to take note that calculated columns are stored in the semantic model. So we want to take note of that. Now, the implication of storing it in the semantic model means that, well, if we have many of it, our model is going to continue to increase in size. And increasing in size simply means that as we have more of these calculated columns, our model is going to be growing alongside the number of calculated columns that we have. So we've got to be a bit careful when we are dealing with that. And of course, it also has a specific icon that we can also take note of. We could also have calculated tables as well. We can also have a calculated table. It's basically a table that we create using DAX. So we'll be creating these with DAX. All right. So we'll create a calculated table with DAX. We are going to be seeing which ones, how we do that. Now, the big question that a lot of data analysts usually have is, which one should I use? What's the difference between using a measure and a calculated column? Okay, we've talked about measures. We said measures are calculated on the fly, meaning that they are not stored within the data model or the semantic model, but calculated columns are stored in the semantic model. So what's the difference between the two before we now get into the lab? Now, two of them, first of all, the similarities, both of them are created using DAX. So we can create measures using DAX. We can create calculated columns also using DAX. So that is a similarity. But while we can create the two of them using DAX, they have their specific use cases and there are some differences as well. Now, the first one we want to take note of is that for calculated columns, they will generate their values per row. So here I'm going to say values are generated per row or per record. So that's one thing for calculated columns. So what that means is it's going to expand the data set with new fields that we can use to filter and so on. Okay, so what that means also is that calculated columns will create computations on a row by row basis and is going to be adding new fields to the table. What that also means is that it is stored in the Power BI file, in the PBIX, which is the Power BI extension, is stored in the PBIX file. So what that means is, of course, it will increase the size of the model. That's very, 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 very important to take note of. Okay, so measures, on the other hand, of course, are dynamic. So that means they are created on the fly, which I said before. They are dynamic, meaning that they are created on the fly. And what that also means is that they are updated automatically based on context, based on filters and interactions that are applied within our reports. Okay, so the implication of being dynamic is that it is not stored in the model. So not stored in model is another difference. And being not stored in the model means that it does not affect the size of our Power BI file. Okay, so that is very, very important. That's something we need to take note of. Okay, so depending on what you want to do, you could use one or the other. So let's go into what we will be doing further here. We are going to be looking at our Power BI and some of the things that we can do with them. So first, we are going to, for example, create a calculated table. So usually we will be doing, I'll just close this. I don't want to sign in yet. And I'll just collapse this to give us more space for us to see. Let me just zoom this in a bit and give us some clearer view. Okay, this is where we stopped in the last class. So we want to create a calculated table. Okay, so we want to create the salesperson calculated table. Of course, like we said, we want to creating a calculated table will involve entering some DAX. Okay, so I'll go now into the table view. So I am in the table view, and this is exactly where I want to create a new table. You can see here that when I open the table view, we have a contextual menu called the table tools. And within the table tools, we've got the manage relationship, and we've got the calculations area here that allows us to create a new measure, create a quick measure, create a new column, or create a new table, for example. Now, since we want to create a new table, we'll go ahead and click on this one called create new table. Okay, so we see now that something very similar to what we have in Excel, a formula bar comes up. Okay, we want to create a table from an existing table. Now, notice here, there's no table called salesperson. Okay, we want to create a table called salesperson from another table called salesperson performance. So that's what we want to do. So how will we do that? We want to go ahead and type the name of the new table. So I'll call the table salesperson. Okay, and then I'll put an equality sign, meaning that a formula is coming. Okay, so I'll go ahead and say equal to, and then I want to type the table I want. So I'll type sales person, and the first table comes up. So what I basically am doing here is I want to create a copy of the salesperson performance table and call the table that I have copied salesperson. That's exactly what I'm going to do. So I just go ahead and tap this to accept the formula. So we will have, take note here, that there is no table called salesperson, but there is a table called salesperson performance. And what I'm doing here is I want to call this table salesperson, and I want to base it off of this table called salesperson performance. So if I'm happy with my formula, I'll just go ahead and accept this by clicking on commit. Okay, so we can quickly see something interesting happen. We see that we've got products, region, reseller, sales, now the new salesperson. Now, you look closely enough, you're going to see that the icon on the salesperson table is slightly different from the icon on other tables. You would see that the salesperson table has the normal table icon, and it has a calculator icon that is on top of it. That's one way you would know that a table is a calculated table because of the icon that it would have. Okay, so this is the data view, and that new table is also automatically available. That, sorry, was the table view, and that new table is automatically available in the data view as well. So we can see here the salesperson table is also available there. We can go ahead and continue to use the table. Okay, so that's one of the things that we can do. Okay, so of course, within a specific table, we can go ahead and do a lot of things like we'll do on a normal table. So for example, if we want to hide some of the fields, I can click on the field right here. I want to hide it. I can click on the ellipsis next to it, and I can decide to hide it and so on. I can go here and click on hide, and that column is hidden. We could also go to the model view and do the same thing. So if I go to the model view and I'm still within the salesperson table, I can click on another icon here, and we can see there's an eye symbol. I can go ahead and click on that, and we see it hides it. Okay, and I could go again to another column here, and we can see on the properties bar, we see the property called is hidden. Is this here? The toggle switch is currently set to no. I can go ahead and click on the toggle switch to set it to yes, which hides it. So if we've hidden that and we come here, we can see that only the two columns that we did not hide becomes visible, for example. All right. So those are some of the things that we can do. Now, within a table as well, there are other things we can do. I can come to a table. In this case, I'll click on salesperson. Okay, so our salesperson table is, okay, I'll come to the model view. I'll click on the salesperson table and I can actually enter a description here. Now, that description, while not entirely necessary, can become very important for documentation purposes. Of course, we can write it so that if somebody hovers over our table, remember, it is other people that will be using your report. So you want to, as much as possible, give them all of the little details that's going to help them understand what's going on. So I'm going to give it a description. I can say salesperson related, for example, to sales. And I'll just go ahead and click on enter. And if I come to another view and I hover over the sales person table, we can see a description there that gives us the details, salesperson related to sales. Okay, even if we were to add the table into a visual, we'll still be able to see some of those descriptions as well. So that's one thing we can do. Now, another thing we can do with DAX is we can create a date table. And to create a date table, there are specific kinds of functions that we can use. Let's go ahead and look at some of those functions. To create a date table, there are functions that we can use. Functions like a function here called calendar. Okay. And then there's another one here called calendar auto. And the calendar auto takes a parameter. So we're going to see how we can use some of those functions and what will be the result. Now, you will be hard pressed to put in or to create any report that does not have time related calculations. So we're going to see one of the things that we will be doing more than other things will be to view our data in a dimension of time. We are going to be looking at things that are related to time. If you are working with financial data, for example, you want to know how profitable the organization has been. If you are working with healthcare data, for example, time becomes very important. If you are working with marketing data, time is also important. So you doing time-based calculations becomes very important. So we're going to be creating a table called date. So I'll go ahead and click on new table here. Okay, so we see here, we don't have anything. It just tells us table. We want to call our table date. So we are going to give it date. And we are going to specify equals to. Again, meaning that a formula is coming. Now, we are going to be using the function called calendar auto. Okay, so it prompts me. I'm going to accept calendar auto. Now, calendar auto takes one parameter. Okay, we can see here at the top that the parameter is the fiscal year end month. Now, and it gives us the value here. It says that it returns a table with one column of dates calculated from the model automatically. So the parameter we want to put here is the fiscal year end month. Now, if you do not put any parameter, for example, you write it like that, it means that by default, the year will end on the 12th month. That's default behavior. But for those of us that have worked in organizations where the financial year begins in a month other than January, you know that this can become very important. We know of organizations that their fiscal year begins in the middle of the year. Some begins in March, in April, as the case may be. So the single parameter that the calendar auto function takes is the fiscal year end month. Now, if I put in 6 as the parameter, what that simply means is I am creating a date table, for example, that is going to begin in the month of July, because that 6 there means that the year ends in June. That's simply what it means. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit on enter. And sure enough, it gives us a table that has a single column called date. We can see here that we can see, of course, that the year begins on the 1st of July 2017. Now, you might ask me why 2017? Because DAX has gone into our data model and seen the date ranges and actually begins the date based on what we have already within our data model. That means we've got dates starting from July, and that is how Power BI that's how Power BI and DAX generates all of those things for us. Now, again, you'll also notice that the date format is a bit different. And that depends on the regional settings of your computer. Here, the date format is month, day, and year. So the July there, the 7 there is actually the month. The 1 there is actually the day, and the 2017 there is actually the year. Now, if you do not like this, you want to come and change your regional settings by coming here to the notification area, and that's where you can go ahead and change. See your regional settings. You can see here that it is English United States. If it were any other place, then that date format will not be what you are seeing. So that's why you are seeing that specific kind of date format. Okay, so we can also do some other things as well. So we have created a date table, but that is not enough, having one column. So we can now add columns to the date table, for example. How do we do that? We'll come in here and click on new column. Okay. And from within the new column, we can now go ahead and calculate some other things as well. For example, I can say I want to create a column called year. And I'll go ahead and type this following formula there. I'll go ahead and specify year and then specify equals to, I want to call it, for example, financial year. So I'm going to write FY, and I want to include the financial year, and I want to also include the actual year. So I'm going to go ahead and put year there, for example, and I want to specify the format. I want to say it should be date, for example, let's say table and column. So I'll specify a quote, date and date, for example. And I want to add some additional stuff. And I'll go and say plus, for example, if specific, of course, I'll say month. I'll go ahead and choose month. Sorry, month, and then I'll go ahead and say date and date. Sorry, my typing skills are not what it should be. So date and date, for example, and then I can close this. So it tells us here, it checks whether a condition is met and returns the value if true and another value if false, for example. And in this case, if I say if the date is maybe greater than 6, which is the last day of the year, and then I'll say, of course, 6/1, and then I'll close. Well, that's a bit of a formula there. And let's go ahead and see what it's going to give us. So we see here that we've calculated the year. Of course, what we have simply said is this: if the month is greater than 6, it should go ahead and assign it the next year by adding 1 to it. So we can see here that 7th of July being it's a new fiscal year called financial year 2018. That's basically what this formula does. Okay, so we can go ahead and do the same thing to calculate month, to calculate year, to calculate all of those other things. So that's basically some of the things that we can do to be able to calculate, for example, some of the basics that we have. We could also come and calculate a new column. We can calculate, we can come to the model view and simply come and do a quick, we can say new measure. We can come here and say new measure. We can also come here and say new quick measure. So if we want to say new quick measure, I'll just quickly show you how the new quick measure works. So if you right click and select new quick measure, it prompts you to choose a category of calculation. It prompts you to choose average per category, filters, differences, text, and all of that. So, for example, if you want to calculate a mathematical formula, you can do an addition, you can do a subtraction, you can do a multiplication, and of course, you can do a division, for example. So let's look at something that's going to be more specific. I'll just close this quick measure here. I'll just close this, and to calculate the quick measure, basically you want to come to any of the formulas here and then right click it and choose that you want to use quick measure. So let's go to the sales table and let's see if we can calculate anything. If we want to multiply cost plus unit price, for example, it can give us revenue, okay, or whatever. If we can say cost plus profit is going to give us something like revenue. So if we come here and say new quick measure, where is it? We can, let's see, if I right click sales and say, okay, quick measure, I can come here and from the sales, I can come and say, I want to do a multiplication. If I want to multiply costs plus, or I want to add cost plus sales or costs plus profits to give us revenue, I can do that. I can come here and say uh, uh, calculation, addition. I can come here and say base value. I'll select from sales. I would say cost. Okay, I'll go ahead and choose cost, and then I can come and say value to add. I can come here and say, for example, profit. Okay, and then I can go ahead and add it, and see, it gives me a measure here that I can do without having to write any DAX. And if you select this, we can quickly see here that it gives us the value. Cost plus profit is the sum of cost plus profit. And I can come here and, for example, change the name here and call it revenue. Okay. And if I do that and click on accept, we can see here that we have revenue, which you will see it has an icon for a calculator indicating that it is a measure. Okay, so we have a lot of things going on here. I don't want to dive in too deep into this, but of course, this is supposed to give you a foundation into what you can do with this. So we are going to be pausing here for today, and I'm going to go offline. If you have a question, then you can go ahead and ask the question. Thank you very much for your time.